I mean, Southwest is totally killing everybody now. Southwest was like a golden gem for touring people. And now we can't check luggage for free, which is crazy. Because, I mean, not only is it your luggage, but then it's your Pelican and your equipment, and then it's your instruments. So how do you think that's going to affect everything?
I was just talking to a client about this. There's not really another option. There's this compression effect happening. Travel costs are continually increasing. Guarantees are not increasing. People saw so many shows coming out of COVID and everybody was touring, and now there's this middle tier of you can't get the guarantees you could before. The travel costs are increasing, and it's really creating this squeeze on profitability. It's forcing questions like, well, I know you've been on a bus for a while, but you may have to go backwards to a Sprinter. It's a difficult conversation from our end.
Oh, and y'all are the bad guys.
That's the same conversation when we're talking about the crew. It's like, those aren't one-offs. That bus to Sprinter question versus the day rate versus the insurance, those aren't these little vacuums that you have these conversations in independently. They all go together. It's a balancing act.
When the lights go down, the lasers come up, and the pyro explodes, who makes sure it's unforgettable? Show Live SFX, your ultimate partner in spectacular effects. Founded by industry pros Cole Bibler and Hayden Hale, with over 15 years of live production and touring experience working with legends like Taylor Swift, Paul McCartney, and Beyonce, Show Live SFX specializes in jaw-dropping effects, lasers, pyro, fire, and custom designs. They've ignited the stages of legendary acts like Styx, Foreigner, Nitro Circus, Karen Leon, and dazzled audiences at top corporate events. Elevate your show to a whole new level. Whether it's a massive tour or an exclusive corporate gala, trust Show Live SFX to deliver exceptional brilliance and safety. Visit showlivesfx.com today and ignite your lifestyle. Welcome to the Gigs Podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Sanz, founder and CEO of Gigs, the professional career platform for the live event industry. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a huge piece of touring that people don't often talk about: the money, the deals, and the contracts that hold everything together. We have business manager Tate Henshaw and entertainment lawyer Farrah Usmani on to discuss the vital roles in the industry. First up is Tate Henshaw, co-founder of ARC, a business management firm based in Atlanta. With 15 years of experience and named 40 under 40 accountants, Tate works with everyone from Grammy-winning musicians like Neo to NBA All-Stars like Blake Griffin, helping them manage the chaos of financial planning, taxes, royalty tracking, tour budgeting, and long-term wealth strategy. Tate, welcome to the Gigs Podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Super pumped. I did a lot of prep before this because you always, I'm very excited to learn more about business management and law and things that I truly don't know enough about. So here we go.
Well, you're one of the few who's excited to learn about that stuff. So
I'm hyped, man. So I want to start with, say I give you $100,000 budget to run a 3-month tour. What is the first thing that you would flag as something to cut, and what is something that you would never compromise on?
Well, I think it's really going to depend on the specific artist. Like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a band? Are we talking about a solo artist? Hip hop, pop, in some of those industries, the production is a lot more valued. And I don't mean that by it's less valued in other industries, but a lot of the show in, say, pop or hip hop, you're depending on that production, whereas a band, maybe you're not so much, and maybe you want to go with more on the talent side as far as your front of house, for example, because that's going to affect the band mix a lot more maybe than on a hip-hop tour where maybe you've got a DJ, you've got tracks. So you would really want to think about the individual artists, and obviously in that scenario we're working with management, with the agency as well to think through those things, but really putting the emphasis on the areas that are going to make the biggest difference. Like, I was sitting with a manager, a guy that right before this, and we were talking about a solo artist, and we may need to invest more in the players that are around her, because if the players aren't up to her standard, unfortunately the perception can be that it brings her down to the standard of the people around her.
Wow.
So that's just one example that we think about.
And when do you know? Okay, so you kind of take a budget, and you also have this artist that's maybe on the rise. Say, take a country artist like that. Man, how do you quantify talent like that?
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can talk about numbers all day, but it's also about relationships. It's about actually seeing people in their element. It's about all those intangibles. And so what we're normally doing in all aspects of our job is marrying the quantifiable with those other things, with those intangibles. And I think you said, when do you know? Well, a lot of times you don't know for sure, but you're continually trying to learn, trying to improve, trying to see where are the holes in this operation, where is the ROI going to be the highest if we add more. And it's just a continually dynamic process.
Man. So it really is so personalized by the artist or by the person that you're representing. So let's take maybe more hip hop, and then they're putting more into maybe lighting and effects and DJ. What is the most important for that? Because that makes sense with a band. Okay, probably that front of house, probably the musicians to make that sound good. That's really what you're there for, is just to listen. But for hip hop, you're there for the whole experience of it. What is the thing that you can't compromise on for that?
It is the production elements, because also if you think about it, when you've got a band, you've got kind of a full stage taken up, and you've got a lot of energy. You've got the guitar player and the bass player and the keyboardist and the drummer. But if it's hip hop, you may only have the one artist on stage. You may only have the artist and a DJ on stage if they don't have band members, which they could. But if not, what is visually taking up the space just as much as on the audio side?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you may be able to fill the audio side with just the individual rapper and a DJ and be good to go. But visually, if you think about it, right, if you go to a show and it's just one guy rapping the whole time with the DJ, it's going to have to be really, really compelling lyrically to keep your attention for a couple hours. So, what are those other elements that come in and aid that visually?
How interesting. I'm thinking about like my time working Bonnaroo and seeing you have a musician just with their guitar on this tent stage, and then you have, I think it was like Gucci Mane or something when I was working it. And it was like, just what a different vibe. But the stage wasn't changing. They just had to do things differently. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and similar like EDM, right, with the DJ.
Right,
like that's a similar concept of, you've got all this musical stuff happening, but visually, how is the fan engaged?
You got to have a video board. If you, oh, that's crazy.
Another thing that, when those shows grow, you end up adding dancers a lot of times as well. So you end up, again, on the visual side, adding more to the song. And then you get into things, I don't want to get ahead of us. We're talking about hidden costs, all this kind of stuff. You get into, okay, well, we got to pay the dancer. That's probably obvious. There's a dancer on stage. They have to be paid. But you're also talking about choreography cost, rehearsal cost, because you think about the dynamics of a band rehearsing songs. Okay, how long does that take? But versus 4 dancers that don't normally dance together with new choreography, figuring out a whole set, right? So you've got a little more on the front end, because if the dancers, they can all be individually great, but if they're not doing the same stuff, that kind of ruins the experience also.
So like maybe an ideal is someone like a Zach Top, he can just command a crowd with a guitar.
Sure.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
I'll see some backup dancers for Zach Top.
Yeah.
Maybe.
We could suggest that.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Probably different dancers, probably more jean short, like line dancing maybe, versus like,
I don't know.
The other.
Let's see the
it could
blend
go either
of,
way though.
True.
It'd be memorable.
So
Certainly.
So I'm really excited to jump into the hidden cost of touring. So I feel like, especially crew that come into a show or come into work, and they might be upset with their day rate or their week rate, whatever it is. But I don't think people speak about the tour economics enough to understand, hey, sometimes the artist is hardly even getting paid because you're getting paid, because the production has to get paid, the promoter, the management, and whatever else, the venue. So when you start a tour, when you're booking venues, can you get into what is that first huge cost that's taken away right away?
I mean, travel is by and large a huge cost, right? And just, I tell people this sometimes, like, if you think about a traveling circus, like a tour is not that different from that.
Yep.
Right. You've got all these different teams. You've got all this equipment. You've got all these things they got to get from A to B quickly. People have to stay somewhere. Bus drivers have to have somewhere to take a shower.
Right.
Right. You don't think about those kind of costs. Right. And I think we can get into it more later, but depending on how things are routed, you could get extra costs based off those. There's so many things that you don't really think about. Even before the tour starts, most venues require, a certain amount of liability insurance, for example.
Yeah.
So you've got to outlay for that. There's,
Does
no
the
shows have
take
even
that?
happened. The artists are paying for that too. Yeah.
And the promoter?
No.
Interesting.
No. Well, let me caveat that.
Yeah.
The artist has their own policy.
Okay.
Usually the venues have their own policy, or the festival, the promoter, whoever it may be. And then in certain scenarios, especially festivals, you are indemnifying each other. Which, I'm not an insurance professional specifically, but you're saying, hey, I've got this amount of coverage, you've got that amount of coverage. You're marrying them together, which is why it's important to work with good insurance people, which we do, who know the industry. But there's a significant amount of cost there. You've got to have business auto coverage for also the vehicles you're hiring. You've got to have workers' comp coverage for your employees, inland marine coverage for your equipment.
What is it called?
Inland marine.
Okay. Haven't heard that before.
That's translation is like stuff that's moving around on land.
Oh, okay.
So when I first started, I was like, what's this? What are we doing in the water? Marine, I think water, but no, it's one of those. And that's a cost that, you never want to pay insurance premiums, right? You're like, I don't need this until you do need it.
Right.
I always talk to people about how many people have seen a GoFundMe because a band's trailer got stolen at a Holiday Inn Express. I don't know why it's always a Holiday Inn Express, but maybe there's an inside job.
I think I know why.
But, they didn't have that coverage, which is, it's not that you want to pay that cost, but you certainly don't want to be in that situation where you're now having to rebuy all your equipment.
Oh my gosh, that's devastating. So protect. How early should you be doing this?
Inland marine, I would say, if you're touring around with equipment, I'd look at it immediately. And there's some companies that are formed more for the DIY space. So it's not crazy expensive. It's not as expensive as you would think.
For like an arena level.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's way different. And you've got, at that level, you've got all these schedules and all this kind of stuff where you've got to keep up with all the different equipment that you have and all that kind of thing. So
right off the bat, you got insurance and travel. And travel, Southwest is totally killing everybody now. Southwest was like the golden gem for touring people.
Yep.
And now we can't check luggage for free, which is crazy because, not only is it your luggage, but then it's your Pelican and your equipment, and then it's your instruments. So how do you think that's going to affect everything?
I was just talking to a client about this a couple of weeks ago, and, it's like, well, there's not really another option, right? And the same thing with bus companies, with all those things, like there's this compression effect happening, I think, when you look at it from the macro level of travel costs are continually increasing. Guarantees are not increasing at that rate for most artists, right? I think when you talk about headlines, you see the outliers, certainly. But there's kind of this touring malaise or something of people saw so many shows coming out of COVID and everybody was touring. And now I feel this middle tier of you can't get the guarantees you could before. The travel costs are increasing, and it's really creating this squeeze on profitability for a lot of groups, which is unfortunate. And it's forcing, questions like, well, I know you've been on a bus for a while, but you may have to go backwards to a Sprinter. You may have, those kind of things. And it's a difficult conversation from our end. Because
y'all are the bad guys.
That's the same conversation when we're talking about the crew. It's like, those aren't one-offs. That bus to Sprinter question versus the day rate versus the insurance, those aren't these little vacuums that you have these conversations in independently. They all go together.
Wow.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah. Can you just explain what a guarantee is?
So when an artist is playing a show, the deal is going to be constructed in one of only a few ways, as Farrah can explain even better than me later. But if you've either got a guarantee or you've got some sort of back-end split, or you've got a hybrid situation. So the guarantee is you will walk away with at least this amount regardless. And I say regardless, as long as you play the show.
Yeah.
Right? Which, sorry to keep rabbit trailing, but cancellation insurance, another hidden cost.
Oh my gosh. Whoa.
But yeah, the guarantee is what you're going to walk away with. And so when we're talking about budgeting, a lot of those things, most times that's what we're using to budget off of. Now, in theory, some shows this is a guarantee, this is what you get. You could sell it out, nobody could show up, doesn't matter. You're getting X. Sometimes you're going to get at least X, but if you go above this certain percentage of sales, ticket sales, revenue, net profit, however it's constructed, then you could get more. You could go into like a bonus situation. And then it gets more complicated as you go. Sometimes if say a larger promoter kind of buys a full tour, then you could have like a hybrid of like you've got guarantees per show, but then the bonus is stretched out over the whole tour. Like you've got to do a certain performance over a longer time period to justify a bonus, which kind of hedges their bets a little bit.
Whoa.
Like just because you did one show really well and bombed the other 10, they don't want to pay you a bonus. They're like, we need that money to recoup our losses over here.
Whoa.
So they're kind of doing that, and those deals are becoming more normalized, I feel like, with some of the more prominent promoters are just, that's what's happening. They're buying up a lot of the independent people. And so that's the way they're, again, hedging their bets, is they're putting them in rooms that they control, but then they're also spreading the risk over more shows.
Whoa. So you're got it. And then based on those guarantees is what you're budgeting on, because you're going to get that no matter what.
Yeah. So what we don't want to do is budget based off the best case scenario.
With the bonus.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, look, this looks great. Look, there's a lot of green on this. But if we know we're, going to make X or at least break even with the guarantees, then we feel confident, okay, management, booking, the artist, whatever, when we talk about revenue streams, et cetera, like we've got some other areas we can capitalize on to pad this, but we also want to be confident that we're not going to be upside down.
Oh, this is fascinating. Okay, this is totally going to vary on, I know this is not, you can't blanket this answer, but what do you hope to get an artist percentage-wise of that guarantee? If you have to pay out production.
Okay. So one of the numbers that we'll use to generalize is kind of like 30% of the guarantees is like a net profit number. Again, by genre, by, I think we talked about earlier, like the cost for a DJ or a hip hop performer versus a full band versus a huge stadium show are going to vary quite wildly. But that's kind of a good starting point. So then you kind of think about, you've got commissions, you've got overhead, and then you've got the artist profit.
What's commissions? I'm just
so
learning
commissions.
So much.
What I'm speaking about generally is the fact that, if it's okay if I zoom out
Let's
for
go.
a second. So an artist, let's say you've got an artist grossing whatever number we want to use, $1 million, $10 million a year, something like that. A normal business that was grossing that would probably have a COO, a CEO, a CMO, a CFO, chief legal counsel, all these kind of things. Well, an artist generally has pretty much none of those things.
Right.
So, working directly for an artist may be an assistant, maybe some internal infrastructure, and it grows over time, granted, but most of those roles are being executed by outsourced teams, aka the artist management company or individual, the booking agent, the business management company, and the law firm associated with the artist. And so what you end up with normally is commissions. So those individuals are normally incentivized based off the gross earnings of the artist to pay, well, this is a little misnomer, not pay, I don't get that money per se. There's a whole team working on those at each of those companies. So you've got people at the management company doing, different marketing things. You got the booking agent, tracking down ticket counts, all that kind of stuff. So they're executing those finance, operational, marketing, and legal roles to kind of generalize. And so those are what I'm talking about when I say commissions. Those are being paid based off the amount that the artist earns.
Woof. Yeah. So that's right off the bat, commissions, see you later. Production, what the promoter's taking. What about, and I know we'll get into it with Farrah, but what about merch? How does that work with venues?
So merch is going to be a little all over the place. Like you got venues where they're like, you just do your thing. We don't care. You've got venues who are very involved. Obviously, when you get to bigger like stadiums and stuff like that, they're going to have their own kind of infrastructure that you're plugging into. To not get overly finance nerd speak here, but you also want to make sure you're coordinating how the sales tax is handled.
Oh, yeah.
Because sales tax, when me or you go to wherever, I would shop at maybe Costco. You shop clearly at nicer places than me,
right.
probably.
That's hilarious.
But, we're paying sales tax when I buy this Kirkland black shirt, right? But then when an artist sells that, it's the same responsibility. The problem being, you're selling it in different states.
Yeah.
Each state has a different tax rate. They have different people controlling it. So many times you're coordinating with the venue because they're registered with the individual state. So they're taking care of the sales tax burden and figuring all that out. So there could be splits. It could be different split based off cloth or hard goods, or music is really the way I think about it. A lot of times those are different splits. And then usually you may be paying for a merch seller at the venue. Not always. Sometimes you have your own. Sometimes you send your own on the road. That's another analysis piece where you're like, does it make sense for us to pay a merch seller ourselves, or does it make sense to pay at each individual venue? And obviously there's benefits when you have your own person. You're going to have a consistent experience versus you don't necessarily know what you're getting into if the venue's providing it. So that's just one more of those budget analysis
That's why you just
points.
make a tour manager do it too. That's why you're like, oh, you want to be a TM, also sell merch, also do VIP. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the TM wears a lot of hats many times, for sure.
They earn those hats.
They earn every dollar that they're paid, yes. And they can make our job a lot easier, or they can make it a lot more difficult.
How? Tell me that.
Well, normally we're not on the road with the client. In some scenarios, depending on the scale, it may make sense to have a production accountant, a tour accountant,
Right.
whatever. But normally, we're getting all the info on what's going on from the TM. If there's ever a dispute, well, how many people were there? Well, guess what? I wasn't there. The agent may have been there, management may have been there, but the TM's always there. Mm-hmm. So they have to keep the venue, honest.
Yep.
They're handling what we call road float. So the cash expenses that are happening on the road, which is, is a little crazy all over the place, and runners and all that kind of stuff, which, we try to make that easier with some different tools and cards and prepaids and some of that stuff.
But you could also mess up. This is something I learned the hard way when I was a PA, managed like 6 runners. Mm-hmm. One runner accidentally didn't use the cash or whatever it was. They used their credit card. And I was like, it's okay, I'll just reimburse you. But then we had to return it. So who does the money go back to? The freaking runner. That's right. And so I learned the hard way that that can't happen. They cannot put it on their card, even if you reimburse for something like that.
Yeah, on their card. Right. Yeah. Yeah, for
Good way to make some money.
Yeah.
Go buy a MacBook and then have to return it.
Yeah. Oh, shucks. Yeah. That would never happen.
Never. So that's interesting. So it's when you get up to the big, huge arenas and stadiums that you kind of have a tour account on the road.
Correct.
And they work for the business management, or they their own,
normally,
maybe under the artist?
Yeah. Or they could be like a solo kind of contractor that you bring in. Just, again, depends on is the artist touring all year, or these kind of some one-off shows? Because you want to have a person that's good, obviously, first and foremost. So just evaluating, is it someone we bring on all year because they're going to be doing this much work, or do we find someone who already has an expertise there because they're only playing 10 shows?
Yeah. I've always wondered this. Do most tours, so this is a big question, do most tours break even, lose money, or make money?
I would say most make money.
Okay.
Now, that could be slightly off base because that's my perspective. So that's like clients I'm working with.
He's like, yo.
Which maybe implies they're not just starting out.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Totally.
Right? So that could be, the ones I'm evaluating, most of them make money. Now, the profitability can vary all over the place. Yeah, most of them make money, I would say.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
I've always kind of wondered that. Then sometimes it makes the news of like, look how much money they're making every weekend. And you're like, and I just see so much like, sometimes the crew is like, oh my gosh, I should get paid more. And it's like, you have no idea. You're getting paid great, and I think that's an interesting conversation online
gross,
right now.
Right, is the numbers that they see. And maybe it's the gross. Right.
Maybe.
Where are you getting this info from all the time and all that kind of stuff? And it's similar to a lot of the athletes we work with, their contracts are public. People think, they've made $10 million. Well, they made 5 because 50% of that went to taxes.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So
there's another hidden cost, baby.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. Taxes, commissions, travel.
Mm-hmm.
Gross. Yeah. Okay. How do you navigate conversations with clients that they really can't afford this thing, but they really want it? You probably have to get into the psyche of them. You have to have a relationship with them. How does that go? Yeah,
you really have to understand, because I have clients that if you threw out the same scenario, they have the same amount of money, this thing costs the same, I would talk to them totally differently. Because you have to understand their mindset. You have to understand their goals. Because what I ideally want to do is create a plan that they agree to. So, okay, here's the plan. If we execute this plan, we're going to reach your goals. Okay? And their goals have to be somewhat realistic for that to work. But if that's the case, then we have the ability to go back when this scenario comes up and say, this isn't me telling you no. This doesn't fit your plan. It's not my plan. See? So you start phrasing, this is your plan. This doesn't fit your plan.
Yeah.
So then you're kind of pitting them, their ultimate goals against their short-term wants. And I've found that to be more successful, not always successful, but more successful in that context versus me continually telling them no. If I continually tell them no, what happens is they stop asking me.
Oof.
And then they just go do it anyway, right? Because you become the no person. The other thing we try to do is, let's say it's an investment or something like that. Like maybe there's an investment and we just know this is not good. This is really bad. Like there's no way this is going to be successful. But what we try to do is give them an alternative. So say, okay, you want to go do this. You want to, let's say, buy an Airbnb in Miami to rent out. Well, what's the problems with that? I said, well, who's going to fix the toilet when the toilet breaks and you're on tour?
Yep.
That's just one example. I mean, you've got ROI, you've got a lot of risk because there's only one of those. But what we try to do is say, okay, real estate is definitely a good area to invest in if you can do it smart in a way that fits your profile. So, you know, it may be a multifamily fund, someone who runs 10 apartment buildings, right? Now, your, in theory, return could go down slightly, but your risk goes down significantly. Because if one of those apartments is not occupied, does it affect you? In theory, yes, but effectively, no, because it's one out of, 1,000 or however many. So, unless some crazy scenario happens, because hopefully the buildings are in different geographic areas, you're not having overly exposed to like California wildfire risk or like, you had a bunch of Airbnbs in Asheville, to your point.
Yep.
Right? Like it could look really good until it doesn't. And so we're trying to provide them an alternative that matches their risk profile, because if it's a successful person, client, athlete, whatever at that point, the reality is it's more important for them to not lose than it is for them to have these outsized wins. They don't need to hit a home run every time to be successful and meet their goals. But if they strike out a bunch of times, they can miss their goals. So we're looking for those singles, maybe doubles, for them, because it's kind of like if you zoom out, they hit the lottery already.
Right.
You're like, you don't need to keep buying tickets to be okay. Like you've had this big moment, this inflection point, this influx of income. If we manage that well, you're going to be good.
You've already done the risk.
Make a bunch of huge bets and lose it, which unfortunately we've all seen in the news or ESPN documentaries or whatever, then you can certainly lose that.
Yes.
So.
Are you guys also sometimes responsible for that financial education? And
Yes.
Almost
always.
Okay.
Because what you see is, so we're athletes, artists, actors, are our main like client base. We have influencers, speakers, this sort of thing. But normally you have young people who don't have much financial background. They come into wealth very quickly. They also come into the public eye very quickly.
Yep.
And all those things create this really weird scenario. You've got a lot of people around you telling you exactly what you want to hear, saying yes to everything. You've got people that you trust that unfortunately don't know financially what you need to do because they're not in your same scenario. Doesn't mean they're not successful, but they're not an A-list actress. They're not a Grammy-winning artist, right? And so helping them navigate that, it's an interesting dynamic, needless to say, and helping them understand, especially at that young of an age, because we're always telling people, I think from the outside looking in, we can easily say, I can't believe they lost all that money. I would never have done that. It's like, okay. If I dumped a few $1 million in your lap when you're 19 years old and said, hey, you really need to put this in bonds. You really need to think about, logistics companies. You really need to just, be safe. I would like to think I would do that, but let's be honest. It's probably not going to happen. There's going to be some fast cars. There's going to be some fun vacations. There's going to be, who knows what, because I didn't know what I didn't know at that point. Even being a finance math major, I didn't know all this stuff.
Totally.
So it's very challenging. And, artists don't have quite the risk of the athletes, but still you have so much earning power. The athlete, I just turned 40 earlier.
Congrats.
Earlier
Happy
this
birthday.
year. Thank you. How many professional athletes do you know that are my age or older?
Everyone. Yeah, no, that's crazy. That's crazy.
LeBron's a couple weeks older than me, which is really discouraging, just so you know, because of all the things he's still doing. And, I can't walk up a few flights of steps very easily, but he's the outlier. Tom Brady's the outlier. The athletes, by and large, are going to be retired when they're 30, 35.
Yeah.
That would be a great career. That would be fantastic if you had a 10, 15-year run. Wow. And so you had this great earning potential, but almost certainly your earning potential is going to crater when most people are in their prime earning years.
Yes.
Right? Most people, 40, 50, 60, that's your prime earning years. Theirs almost certainly is going to go to almost zero.
Whoa.
Or it's going to go way down. So you have such a risk there of setting your lifestyle up as if you're going to continually make the same amount of money when certainly you're not.
Wow.
And I say the artists don't have quite that risk because in theory they could continue longer, but it's not necessarily likely. What's likely is you have, hopefully it's amazing to have one moment, one big hit, one stadium tour, let's say, or something where you're at the top. Mm-hmm. Very, very few people stay at the top.
Right.
Now, they're not maybe going to go down to zero, hopefully not, but almost certainly they're going to go down somewhat, which is still great. It's still amazing. But if your lifestyle's set for the stadium tour, you're in a lot of trouble.
Have you ever seen a client or just, an experience, you've had a friend who's experienced this, maybe they start living a more immoral life and making those worse decisions? And have you ever been able to, or someone been able to separate from them and just say, this just isn't working anymore?
Yes.
Copy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just certain scenarios where you see I see where this is going. And unfortunately, if you are on that ship when it crashes, you get tied to that reputationally. And so sometimes you have to make those decisions, which is really difficult because a lot of times that's when those people need you the most. But you have to kind of evaluate, is what I'm saying getting through?
Yeah.
Because I talk to my staff a lot. I will tell you, this is not like a sob story by any means, but a lot of times the reality is we are more worried about the things than the actual person is. And it creates a lot of stress, anxiety, a lot of those kind of things. But I have to continually kind of mention all we can do is present the right info, the right advice, the reality to the client. Ultimately, it's their money. Ultimately, it's their decision. So we're just trying to aid them in making good decisions, but we can't make them make good decisions. So.
Dang. Yeah. So you and your team really have to be on what are your core values? What will you guys kind of put up with? Or, what is the breaking point?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
For sure.
So we talked about the hidden costs, but what are the hidden revenues of touring specifically or music specifically?
Absolutely. So, like I said, we're budgeting based off of those guarantees, but what we're planning for is optimizing those other revenue opportunities. So you could be looking at merchandise, obviously, is a huge opportunity. Massive opportunity. It's easy to do it okay. I think it's hard to do it really well.
Yes.
I think the return on doing it really well is massive, where you can almost have this other brand you're building, right? This other thing where people are like, I mean, their music's cool, but I love their merchandise, right? Like I want to get all their stuff. I want to,
Who's someone like that?
That's a good question.
I will say merchandise, I'm so sorry, but it could be better. It's just crazy to me.
Yeah.
Anyways, this is a whole nother conversation. We need to get someone in merch on here.
Yeah. I always like to see, not just the T-shirt with the logo on it. I mean, you got to have
Or the face. I don't want a face on my shirt.
No, I don't want a face. I agree with you. But you got to have the logo shirt. I'm not saying don't have that, but what else? Like, what's your fan demographic?
Exactly.
You got families, get some onesies going.
Right.
Get a little baby hat. Get a pacifier.
Baby
something
hat.
Like that, right?
It's
People
amazing.
love that kind of stuff. That's
Totally.
also what they're going to turn around and take a picture of, post it online, which comes back and kind of, it's
Absolutely. That's the next adventure I would want to get into. It's like really good merch.
Yeah. You've got some people that want to get into like different like food products, different things like that. That's kind of sketchy because of licenses and making sure you've got that all tied up with a bow, and you can have some liability if you're not careful there. But there are some definite opportunities in those other arenas.
So merch.
Oh yeah, that was only one.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I went off on a tangent.
Yeah, you got VIP scenarios, which can be very different. You can be eat and greet. That could be just a normal meetup. That could be, a smaller, kind of more intimate show of the artist is going to come out and play acoustic and talk about a couple songs or play some unreleased songs or something like that.
Cool.
You've got, what else? You've got brand sponsorships, right? Which can really go to offset some costs.
It's huge.
I think that's really an art. That's a lot on the agency and management to kind of help identify those. They don't just come out of nowhere. I mean, if you're Taylor Swift or Beyonce, they're at every door knocking.
Yes.
But if you're that kind of mid-tier artist, it's really on your team to present it to that potential sponsor of why does this matter?
Yeah.
How does your demographic overlap with our demographic? If it's a Red Bull, if it's some
John Deere
alcohol company or something like that. Like, how do you appeal to them?
Right.
Not just call them, hey, do you want to give me, $50,000 to offset my bus cost? That's probably not that compelling.
It was a return there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So really understanding that and helping the artist understand that, and how you probably not just going to get that check. Like, how are you going to really make that be valued? Are there areas where you incorporate them into the meet and greet? You incorporate them into your socials. Can you offer, hey, what if we popped in to your John Deere dealership in the towns I'm in and did some events and stuff like that? Probably more likely to get them interested that way. I think that's an area where you can be really creative. Because the reality is, this. Touring, there's people's perception is, here's a show. Okay, well, that was 2 hours. There's 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
Now, crew people are working a lot more than that 2 hours, don't get me wrong. But on the artist side, like, you've got some time to go out and maximize your ROI when you're in this city, that city, whatever.
Wow.
And obviously it could be radio if you're coordinating release schedules and all this kind of stuff, radio stations, popping record stores, who knows what.
Totally.
There's lots of opportunities if you're intentional and coordinated.
So cool. We got to get Farrah on here, and then we'll bring the two of you out here.
Cool.
But this was really fascinating. Man,
awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This episode of the Gigs podcast is brought to you by Stagewater. We at Gigs love Stagewater. It's a mission-driven, premium canned water created for artists, crews, and the fans who live for live music. Stagewater donates 15% of all of their profits to support mental, physical, and emotional well-being of the music industry through their partnerships with Music Cares, Backline, NEVA, Music Health Alliance, and the Roadie Clinic. So whether it's backstage, on stage, or in the crowd, Stagewater really brings purpose to hydration and helps keep the people behind the scenes going strong. So to learn more, visit stagewater.com and help keep the music flowing. Next up is Farrah Usmani. She is an entertainment attorney based in Nashville who advises everyone from indie artists to chart toppers on how to grow their careers without giving away their rights. She has negotiated with every major label and music publisher, worked on major touring and streaming deals, and has been featured in Billboard, Variety, and the Tennessean for her work on everything from tour contracts to AI voice protection. If you've ever wondered what an entertainment lawyer really does for an artist, or what you might be missing in your own deals, this conversation is for you. Farrah, welcome to the Gigs podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I am so excited because there are so many words that I don't know, and I'm really excited for you to explain it to me. I want to first start out with, you compared using ChatGPT for contracts to using WebMD for surgery. I love this because ChatGPT is my best friend, and sometimes you think you can use it as a lawyer, but it's like using WebMD for surgery. So what are you risking by doing it yourself?
I think what you're risking when you're relying solely on ChatGPT is that you're not getting expert advice. So I think in the same way that you can go to WebMD and kind of get a sense of maybe questions to ask your doctor, or maybe get a sense of what your symptoms mean, an expert is really what's needed in order to tell you like whether your headache is from dehydration or whether you have a brain tumor, right? And I think that that's kind of the same thing from the legal perspective. I think that ChatGPT can be a really helpful tool to educate yourself and to get kind of a general lay of the land when you meet with your lawyer, the questions that you should be asking. So I think it's a really powerful tool to put yourself in the position to know what to talk to your lawyer about. But I think that what we really get paid for at the end of the day is to bring our expertise to the table, right? So 10 different artists can have the same facts, but the way that it applies to their career is going to be really individualized. And I think that that's where we come in, as, you know, how do we take the facts of your career and apply it to your particular situation in order to protect you?
And you know what their goals are, you know their trajectory or what they're hoping for, and how to, okay, very interesting.
Exactly. And we understand the 360 nature of their career, right? So like, I know on this podcast specifically, we're talking about touring, but touring, you know, a lot of the times has a relationship to your record deal, or it has a relationship to, you know, how you're releasing and marketing music. So I think that if you're asking something like a ChatGPT, a one-dimensional question, it can give you a one-dimensional answer that's probably maybe factually correct, but it's not necessarily telling you how those facts apply to the larger career that you're building for yourself.
Whoa. That's crazy. So you start with an artist. What is that first? You're getting to know them, what they want. So how much are you dealing with tour-related contracts and issues or non-issues versus streaming and publishing versus, I don't even know what else. Like, what are all of the sections of their life that you guys are having a say in or advising in? And which one do you feel like you spend the most time in?
So every artist has, within a music career, you have several verticals, right? So I'd say that the primary verticals are your merchandise business, your music publishing business, which is your songwriting, your record business, which is the recorded music, and then of course touring, right? So I think that those are the four major verticals, and we help the artist and guide them across all of those things. And so I think that in some years with a particular artist, maybe we're focusing more on one than the other. Like, for example, some of my artists right now are in a writing cycle where they're just like kind of holed up in their band house writing songs. And so maybe publishing is really the, you know, where we're focused on for that year with the artist, because they're in the process of writing those new songs. Maybe next year for those artists that are writing this year, they're going to be out on tour, right? So then we're going to see a lot more tour-related contracts, a lot of them trying to put together the teams to take out on tour. So it really depends on where the artist is in a particular project, but we really are involved across the board with, you know, merch, publishing, recording, and then touring as well.
Fascinating. Were you personally interested in law and then you got into entertainment, or were you interested in entertainment and then got into law?
I was interested in entertainment first. So I've been working in the music industry in some capacity since I was like 15 years old. Wow. I think I booked my first show. It was a benefit show for, just like a local charity when I was, 15 or 16 years old. From there, started booking shows in college, went on tour with a couple bands, sold merch, made merch. So really just like loved the music business and primarily like just loved being around creative people. And that is my passion. Like I'm not a creative person by trade. Like I don't really have very many like creative bone in my body, but I get life from being around creative people. And so in college, what started putting me on the pathway to entertainment law is I was working with some artists, like kind of helping with booking shows, selling merch, that kind of stuff. And there was a few artists in our community that had, signed bad record deals. And, in one instance that comes to mind, it was such a prohibitive deal that the band ended up breaking up over it, that they just like couldn't get music out. The label wasn't accepting the songs that they were delivering. And so they just threw in the towel. And that kind of got the gears turning in my head, which was, who should have been looking out for them. And I think from there, that kind of sparked my interest in entertainment law. So I went to law school with the intention of coming back out and working with artists.
That's incredible. Really being an advocate of, feeling that injustice and saying, no, actually, I want to do something about that. Yeah. It's crazy too, because I feel like you went into the least creative side, like law, but maybe not. Do you think that there's creativity in law?
I think there is. I think that one thing that our team is particularly good at is like working with artists who want to do unconventional things, right? So I think that there's a way to go about your career where you kind of follow the lockstep of getting a deal, doing, kind of going through the motions. But then I think that there's some artists, especially I think a lot of what Gen Z has tapped into, where they're not only do they see themselves as multi-hyphenate, not only are they musicians, but maybe they're fashion designers, they're content creators, right? And they have this vision for like what they want their universe to look like. And I think in those instances, we have a lot of flexibility to be creative, to kind of set the artists up to build the business that they want and not necessarily just go through the motions of what the traditional music business expects of them.
That's so cool.
From that perspective, I think that it can be pretty creative.
Totally. Yeah, no, what am I saying? I know nothing. Okay, so cool. So many artists, especially like that first experience you had, they sign a contract, they don't understand, they're excited about it. And now you have artists, so many independent artists coming out, like Jelly Roll. I just heard at Polestar speak about, what labels might be taking from you and how you should be representing yourself or whatever it is. What are the top 3 clauses or cases that you advise people about? Again, I'm coming from truly, I don't know much. So forgive me for not sounding educated in this, but like, what are things to be looking out for in that first, second, or third contract that you're signing? I think the most important clauses in any contract is the term. Okay, so for how long are you signing this contract? How long do you have the responsibilities to the party on the other side of the table, right? So is it a 2-year deal? Is it a 5-year deal? When does the deal conclude? I think the second most important is the grant of rights, right? So in exchange for maybe financial compensation or promotion or whatever, what are you giving up? So I think that those are the 2 most important clauses, right? Is how long is the term of the contract? How long is this relationship meant to last? And secondly, what are you giving up in exchange for entering into this relationship? And I think that that's true across the board, whether it's a tour contract, whether it's your publisher, your record label. I think that those are really the 2 the 2 clauses where where my eyes are going to go first when reading a contract. Of course, the money, you always want to know what the money is. But I think, the money is obvious. I think, it's like an obvious clause, but what are you giving up for that money? And how long are you going to be beholden to this contract, I think is really important to understand. Interesting. So, again, I just came from Polestar, heard Jelly Roll talking about, say you sign a deal, you get X. They will give you money so you can write the album, you can tour, you can do all these things, but you might not even see any of that because you have to pay back that money. What does that look like? Like, how does that work, and how do people get roped into it?
Sure.
How do they see, because right away it's like, whatever, I'll take whatever I can get. But But is this like a beggars can't be choosers? Should you put up with it? I would love your take on that.
You know, I'm of the mindset that I think every situation is different. And I know that that sometimes sounds like a cop-out answer, but like, you know, I think that there's some artists where maybe they're already earning a living off of the music and the content that they've put out there, right? So maybe they're already monetized and like earning quite a bit on Spotify or monetized on YouTube. And they're getting those monthly checks, right? So in those instances, I think that there's quite a bit more leverage, right? Because at that point, if you already have that direct connection with your fans and you already have that core fan base, right? And then let's say a label partner wants to come in and sign you to the label, the first question I ask is, why at this point in your career do you need a label? What's the value add? And what are you giving up in exchange for that relationship that you can't already build independently now that we're kind of in this, you know, content ecosystem where you do have that direct relationship with fans and you're not relying on a record label's distribution platform to get your CD into a record store, right?
Right.
So I think that it's not one size fits all, but I would say that my best advice is never negotiate from a place of desperation, right? So I get it though, that especially in this town, you know, in Nashville, you know, it's hard to be a creative, and I know that a lot of the times people are, you know, creating in their off time and still having to keep a day job, right? And so if the goal is to not work a day job, sometimes those pub deals and the record deals can sound pretty appealing because they'll kind of bankroll your creativity and your lifestyle for a while you try to continue to build the career. But at the end of the day, you know, you do have to pay back advances. You have to recoup them, and it's not a dollar for dollar recoupment, right? So like, let's say that you get, for ease of math, $1 million advance, right? It's not that you pay that back, you know, for every dollar that comes in, it goes towards your recoupment. It's whatever your royalty rate is what you're earning back for that advance, right? So let's say you go into a record deal and you have a 20% royalty. That means for every dollar that comes in, only 20 cents is credited to the $1 million that you were fronted, right? So effectively, you have to earn $5 million in order to recoup the $1 million, right?
And you don't see any of that.
Correct. Correct. So I think that those are things to take into consideration is like, you know, do you have the stomach to recoup in that kind of example that I gave at 20 cents on the dollar? And does it make financial sense? Like, how long is it going to take you to recoup that $1 million versus what are you earning on your own already, right? So I think that there's just a lot of financial considerations to take into consideration when helping an artist decide if it's the right time to enter into a deal.
So, I mean, as a music listener and as a scroller of social media, you're really helping the artists out by hitting those.
You know, I'd like to think so.
Hitting that advance. Yeah, you're not just wasting time scrolling. You're actually feeding an artist. Yeah,
exactly.
So we talked with Tate a little bit about guarantees and bonuses, and I would love to get your take on what a force majeure is and if it's changed since COVID. Now the year is 2025 and really what that means.
Sure. So a force majeure provision in a contract is basically what happens in the event that there's essentially like an act of God, right? So let's say the venue burns down and the artist is supposed to perform at the venue, right? What happens? So the force majeure provision in a tour contract will stipulate just that, you know, like in the event that the show cannot take place and it's not my fault, it's not your fault, it's not anyone's fault, but like the show can't go on. What happens? Who's paid out? Does the money have to be refunded? You know, so the force majeure provision really addresses all of that. And there's many ways that that can be negotiated. That said, going to your question about COVID, of course, COVID, a global pandemic where everything is shut down, a force majeure, right?
Yeah.
That said, post-pandemic, I think that there were a lot of changes with respect to how people were evaluating force majeure provisions, right? Because I think that, you know, we were all in kind of a headspace at the time where, you know, a force majeure clause can define a force majeure in a variety, you know, it'll have a laundry list of things that constitute a force majeure, right? So weather-related cancellations, global pandemic, a fire, a riot that prevents the show from going on, right? So there's like all of these instances that essentially, you know, force majeure just means it's nobody's fault, but the show couldn't go on. And the show couldn't go on because something happened that we couldn't have anticipated. I think that that's important too. So it's not just like, you know,
the gear didn't show up.
Right, sure. Unless maybe the gear didn't show up because there was a failure in the transportation system, right? Then in that case, it could presumably be a force majeure, right?
Got it.
But I think that, pre-pandemic, we would always have language listed in the force majeure provisions that said in the event of a global pandemic, it would be considered a cancellation would be considered a force majeure. So in those instances, I think a lot of people weren't necessarily paying too close of attention to the definition of force majeure. But after post-COVID, now I think that there's a lot more attention being paid to what exactly constitutes a force majeure. And is it something that we can anticipate? Because now that we know that a global pandemic is something that could really happen, what's the obligation to plan for that then versus just kind of lumping it in as an act of God? So I think... And there's also insurance-related kind of questions as well, as I think that the insurance companies became a little bit more sensitive to how force majeure is defined because, as you can imagine, there was a lot of insurance claims related to cancellations pointing to a force majeure provision, right? Yeah. And so I think that there's a lot of businesses in our economy that don't want to be kind of caught in that situation again, where if the whole world has to shut down, do you have to pay out, insurance premiums for the cancellations, right? So I think we're getting a lot more nuanced in force majeure post-pandemic because we're looking at it through a completely fresh lens. It's like, oh, these things can really happen.
And the artist is signing this. Is the venue protecting their ass with force majeure? Because I know, like, whenever I was doing hotel contracts, it was the hotel was covering their ass. It doesn't have to do with the artist, or is it both ways?
So there's multiple layers of contracts in any show, right? Okay. So the artist contracts through their agent with a promoter, right? So your promoter is the company that's putting on the event, right? So the artist's agent will communicate with the promoter and put together a deal where how much is the promoter paying the artist to appear. Then the promoter has the deals with the venues, right? So it's kind of like a trickle down. So each of those contracts is going to have a force majeure, and presumably if the legal is handled properly, then the force majeure from the venue all the way up to the artist in each of those contracts should probably flow through, right? So you don't want one party to be more beholden to a stricter definition that then if something hits the fan, the way that the force majeure obligations flow, you want them to be consistent, right? So that somebody isn't kind of left, like somebody in that chain isn't left holding the bag, so to speak, The artist enters into the contract with the promoter enters into the contract with the venue, and each of those is going to have their own force majeure provision.
Lordy. Can you break down indemnification and liability in plain English and why they matter for crew and as much as artists?
Sure. So indemnification, I feel like, is one of the most misunderstood kind of just general contract terms that we see in a variety of contracts. But the easiest way to define indemnification is basically just when one party is agreeing to step into the other shoes of a party in a lawsuit. Okay, so let me give you an example. Maybe this will help. Let's say you are a third-party vendor that I'm contracting to come sell pizza at my music festival. Okay. And so you and I are going to have a contract. I am, as the festival director, I'm going to contract with the artist to bring them to the festival, and then I'm contracting with all of the individual vendors that are going to appear there to sell stuff, right? An indemnification provision, let's say in the contract between me as the festival promoter and you as the third party providing the service, bringing the pizza to the show, right? The indemnification basically says that if you do something wrong that then ends up with me getting sued, you agree to step into my shoes to defend that lawsuit. Okay, so let's say that your pizza booth collapses because you built it poorly. It's not because of me or because of anything that my festival did. But let's say that your equipment catches on fire, your booth collapses and injures someone, right? Mm-hmm. Whose responsibility is that, right? Because it's my festival, presumably. It's probably somebody else's land, right? Because maybe I'm subleasing the land to throw the festival. But at the end of the day, somebody that was attending that festival got injured and somebody has to take responsibility for it. If you're that person that got injured, technically you can sue whoever you want. You could put the landowner, the festival, the artists, the third-party vendor. You could sue everyone, right? But whose responsibility really is it to handle that lawsuit and to take on the responsibility not only of defending the lawsuit, but paying for it, which can be pretty expensive. And if there is a judgment, who has to pay that judgment, right? So the indemnification provision in this case, if I had a strong indemnification provision in the contract, let's say that, what it would typically say is that if because of your negligence, something happens to an attendee of the festival and I get sued, you have to defend me in the lawsuit and you have to pay all my legal bills. And then if there's a judgment against me, you have to pay for it too.
Wow.
So indemnification is actually super important for, because especially in the live sense, because so many things can go wrong in a live situation. I mean, there's, hundreds, sometimes thousands of attendees. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of kind of temporary construction going on. Yeah. And so indemnification, especially in live events, is super important.
And how, if a crew member, so say I'm a production assistant signing on to be on a tour, how important is indemnification for me with this tour? So, I mean, should I have my own liability insurance, and where does that come in as a crew member?
Yeah, I think that sometimes, it's always wise to have insurance. I think that's a very lawyerly answer, I know, but I think at the end of the day, anything that a crew member, a production company can do to protect themselves is important. So insurance is a great way to protect yourself. That said, I think that anytime a crew member or somebody who's providing a service, if there's any chance that the services that you're providing could lead to something going wrong because of your negligence or because of an act that you take, I think it's really important to get granular on the indemnification provision, right? So just to make sure that if something goes wrong and you were a part of that thing going wrong, whose responsibility is it?
Yeah. Golly. There is so much to look out for.
Quite a bit.
There's a lot of disasters that have happened in our industry, but it's actually pretty amazing how few have happened given the nature of it and
just the sheer quantity of how many shows play off every day, right?
Yeah.
That's so true.
And crowds can, crazy. So yeah, I mean, what if you're representing an artist that is like a Marilyn Manson or like that can really stir up crowds, or Travis Scott is known for having those crowds that he just goes crazy with, and then you got the Travis Scott case where people died at Astro World. So that's kind of risky to take on those kind of clients, right? Or do you guys have a say? I guess, how do you choose who to represent?
Sure. I mean, I usually choose who to represent based off of two things. It's like, do I like the team, and do I, genuinely connect with the art that the artist is making? That said, I come from, a punk background. Yeah. I, grew up in mosh pits. Like, I get that part of some people's show experience is being able to express yourself in those ways. That said, of course, we always want it to be safe, and you don't want, tragedies to happen at shows. But at the same time, I think that I'm not the type of lawyer that's going to discourage an artist from like being authentic or giving their fans what they want. But of course, within the context of like protecting them as much as possible. And that's where insurance comes in. If you're going to do something out of the ordinary that could potentially create liabilities, work with your manager, your business manager, and your lawyer to make sure that you have as much insurance coverage as you can get.
Fascinating. Okay, so going into maybe more contract specific questions with the terms. So just helping me understand this, please, and thank you. So let's say an artist is guaranteed X, maybe $500,000 plus a $50,000 travel buyout or something like that. Can you break down what that actually means legally?
Sure. So just the way that tour deals are negotiated, sometimes you're negotiating not only the guaranteed money that the artist is going to put in their pocket for essentially as a performance fee. That's what I think of as the guarantee. The guarantee is your performance fee for showing up that night and rendering your services as a performer. Then there's all these other things that can kind of be like, can sweeten a deal, right? So, and part of that is, production contribution, right? So, or a travel buyout, right? It's like if the artist has to travel, especially let's say if they're going overseas or something, it's going to be really expensive to get there. Do they have to pay for it themselves, or can the agent, the lawyer, the manager help with getting the promoter to maybe, contribute a little bit of an additional budget to help with covering the travel expenses related to the artist getting to the destination?
I had no idea.
So I think that those are little things that you can kind of like add and negotiate into the deal that isn't necessarily money directly into the artist's pocket, but prevents the artist from having to go out of pocket for those expenses. So at the end of the day, it may not be like, if, like you said, if there's a $100,000 guarantee and a $50,000 or let's say $50,000 travel buyout or whatever, it may not be an extra $50K in the artist's pocket, but at least you're not having to pay that money to get your crew and staff there, right? So
give $50K. Yeah, I'm like, where are they going?
Yeah, exactly.
That was a terrible figure. Sorry,
that's an aggressive travel buyout, but you never know.
On me. I would love a $50K travel.
Same. I could go so many places.
Right? Okay, so what if a contract says that the promoter can't live stream, film, or broadcast? Or actually, I was just told recently, I didn't know this, but if you are a local photographer, you come in and you just do the first few songs and then you got to go. You can't watch the show. I didn't know about that. So let's say the promoter can't live stream, film, or broadcast, but fans are filming it. They're allowed to, except if you're in comedy, they take your phone. So how does all that work?
Sure. So fan-generated content is a little bit different. If a fan is there and, kind of recording the show, it's not much that you can do to prevent all of these thousands of people that are there from uploading that content to YouTube or whatever, right? So I think that it's less a concern about what the fans are doing and more of a concern is is the venue officially recording and trying to broadcast something, right? So how Coachella was this past weekend, there's live streams of the performances and whatnot.
Yeah.
So those clauses are typically to address those sorts of things, right? Is that the venue or the promoter isn't able to record the show and then broadcast it on their YouTube channel or on their website or whatever. So those rights are very closely kind of protected, especially if an artist is in a record deal, because technically if you're assigned to a record label, the record label has exclusive rights to your recording services, right?
Jeez.
So even though, and when we think of recordings, if a label has your exclusive rights to your recordings, we're typically thinking, recordings as in full songs, right? But a recording is really any recorded performance of your music, which includes live events, right? So in instances where we have artists, let's say, that are going to play a music festival and the festival is interested in broadcasting that show, you have to go to the label and get what we call a label waiver, which is you're going to the label and you're saying, hey, look, maybe I have an artist performing at Bonnaroo or Coachella or whatever. They really want to live stream it. Are you guys okay with that? And if so, can you waive your exclusivity? And so then the label will grant those rights. It's limited rights for then that festival to go ahead and, broadcast that show.
There is so much that I don't know. This is crazy. Okay. Have you ever had to pull an artist out of a bad deal after it was already signed?
There have been some instances, I will say, and not necessarily a bad deal that's already been signed. I think that sometimes artists have come to us Yes, sometimes artists have come to us when they've already entered into a bad deal and they ask us if there's something that we can do to kind of get them out of the deal. A lot of the times, we can help with negotiating them out or seeing if there's something that we can do to kind of maybe have an amicable split out from the contract or what have you. But ultimately, I think that especially when you get into touring, when an artist gets to a point where they have a full-fledged tour contract in front of them, I think usually they, hopefully by then have a team in place that's protecting them at least on the baseline. So we don't see a ton of quote unquote bad deals, but sometimes we do have instances where we need to renegotiate better terms. So let's say that an artist enters into a tour deal maybe when they are still developing, right? I think that this happens in an artist's career arc a lot, where you enter into, let's say, a record deal, tour deal, whatever. And maybe you're initially playing, I don't know, large clubs, and then you have something go viral or a song take off or whatever, and now all of a sudden you're being upgraded to way bigger rooms, right?
Yes.
So what happens in that instance? Because presumably if you're selling more tickets, if you're getting in front of a bigger audience and playing bigger venues, then maybe there is a reason for us to go back to the tour partner and say, hey, look, this artist is now very much, has grown into the next tier of artist. So what can we do to make this deal a little bit more attractive for them? And a lot of the times, if you're working with good partners, they want to come back to the table and they want to keep the artist happy.
Yeah.
And those are the instances maybe where we'll go back and try to renegotiate. It's not necessarily a bad deal, but maybe we have leverage to get a better deal now.
Yeah. And I think that what you just said is these partners, they want to keep the artist. People aren't going to want to be assholes to be assholes and want to work together. Or I guess if someone is awful to work with and you're like, we got to get away from this, then it's a whole lawsuit, right? To get out.
Yeah, sometimes it can be, and sometimes it can just be like two parties agreeing that like this relationship isn't working out. Right. And I think that that's the soft skill set of a good lawyer and a good manager too, is that my initial inclination is not to just jump to litigation, right? Like a lot of the times things can be negotiated out, especially in this kind of closed ecosystem of the music industry where we all have to keep working together, right? So I think in those instances, if you can kind of get a sympathetic ear from the other side and have a reasonable conversation about why the deal isn't working out, a lot of the times you can come to some sort of settlement as opposed to kind of going for the jugular every time.
Fascinating. Is there a situation, and you don't have to do specifics, but where you're really proud of your work, where you're like, damn, this is exactly why I'm doing this?
Yeah, there's been like a few instances in my career, I will say. I think that the most fulfillment I get is when I start working with a band super early. So there's been a few instances where, I've gone to the band's maybe their first Nashville show where they're selling maybe 100 tickets at the Basement or something like that. And then over the course of the career arc, now they're playing arenas and, in some instances playing stadiums,
Wow.
So I think that is really the most fulfilling, is being able to get in on the ground floor with an artist, really help them put all of the building blocks in place, and then over the years see it kind of like, that nothing is more tangible than going to a live show and seeing the fans there. Because I think that you can look at the streams and be like, oh, hey, you have 500 million streams, or you have this or that. And like, you can see numbers on the charts that we get from, people like Tate. And that of course, like, is meaningful, but I think it really hits you when you go and you see a show, a sold out arena, and you're like, oh my gosh, I remember when this artist was selling 100 tickets.
Wow. Yeah, you're really part of that journey.
You're a part of that journey, and that's so much fun. And of course, it's fun, like, to be in any part of that arc. And, a lot of the times clients come to us once they've already had that established success, and that's great. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But I think it's most fulfilling when you've been there since that day one, since that first show, and seen it grow over time.
And you've struggled with them through it. So whenever they're earning the awards and thanking all their people, it's like, it is not just that person. It's a massive team under them, getting them there.
And to be able to really be a part of and know everything that went into that artist putting in the hard work to get themselves there.
Too cool. Okay, I want to get you and Tate together. So thank you so much for this. I learned so much, and I know everyone listening has as well.
Of course.
This episode is brought to you by Gigs, the platform built for the live event industry. Whether you're a touring pro, an AV tech, or backstage crew just trying to get a job, Gigs is where you find real jobs from real employers. And if you're hiring, it's the easiest way to connect with vetted professionals who actually show up ready to work. Right now, we've got over 30,000 vetted professionals and thousands of companies already using Gigs, hiring successfully. What are you waiting for? Head to gigs.live to sign up today and take control of your career. Okay, we're bringing it all together. Tate and Farrah, thank you guys so much. I'm learning a lot. This could be a way longer episode, but I want to get into some shared ground as legal and business collide. So we got a tour triangle here. We got business management, lawyer, manager. Who is the quarterback in this, or is it a triangle of collaboration? How does this all work?
I think usually management is kind of the quarterback. I think there's probably certain arenas where other people kind of take the lead. I always describe to the artist, you're the CEO of your business, and then these other service providers are kind of filling those C-suite positions.
Right.
So if you think about a normal business, okay, well, in certain scenarios, the CFO is going to take the lead. In certain scenarios, the COO, in certain scenarios, different people are going to take the lead.
Yeah.
Like if it's, we need a line of credit to run the tour, that's probably going to be something we're going to run. But if it's contract related, obviously I'm definitely not going to be running that. But in general, I would say management is usually the person kind of looking at all the different areas. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the manager is kind of, I view the manager as kind of like the generalist, right? Mm. So they know what everybody on the team does, and then they're able to tap in each of the experts. So whether it's legal, the agent, the business manager, for each individualized issue that they may be dealing with.
Mm-hmm. So when is that relationship formed? Like, do a lot of business management already have relationships with law firms to kind of, do you guys already know each other, or how do you really make that happen?
I think it's a small world, right?
Yeah.
So I think that at least in terms of like the reputable lawyers, managers, business managers, all of us kind of know each other just from the community. A lot of the times, the artist will ask for referrals. So if they're working with a lawyer first, let's say, they'll ask us, who would you recommend for business management, or if they're looking for a new manager, we can make those recommendations. But a lot of the times the artist has preferences, or maybe they already have people on the team that then we kind of integrate and just try to work together.
Yeah. Very cool. Mm-hmm. So have you ever had to intervene when another part of the team was steering something in the wrong direction? So has legal ever butt heads with management or business management?
Yes. And I think, I don't want to redirect your question or avoid answering it, but sometimes that's healthy, actually, because there could be, on the financial side, it looks really good or bad, but then you want legal or management to vouch for let's say there's a tour that's going to lose money, but it's going to really increase your brand awareness. It's really going to pay off long term. Well, maybe that is worth it. And so if you call that butting heads, potentially, but that's where the artist, if the team's working well together,
yes,
then the artist can really take advantage of more than the sum of the parts and have better information to make those decisions versus, if it's not working well together, then I'm trying to tell him why the manager's not doing his job well, or vice versa, to make one or the other person look good, which is really damaging to the artist, unfortunately. Totally.
Anything for you?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that sometimes there's a healthy amount of checks and balances, right? So sometimes, like, for example, I think, when we were talking about earlier, that sometimes maybe the money looks really good, but then the lawyer takes a look and it's like, well, you're giving up a lot for this money, right? So then I think that then encourages conversation, which is, what are the priorities? Is the priority on this particular tour or this particular record deal to maximize the dollar, or is it to really try to find a middle ground where we're balancing the rights you're giving up with the money that you're asking for? So I think that the checks and balances is healthy.
Yeah.
Who does an artist need to get first? Manager, lawyer, business manager?
I would say it's rarely business manager, only because if they don't have a manager or an attorney, how do they have all this money to manage?
Okay, yeah.
If they are looking for us and they don't have an attorney manager, that's probably an issue, because I would be really concerned about how did this money come in and who read this contract and all those kind of scenarios.
Got it.
There will be times when it's pretty simultaneous. Like if there's a lot of demand and there's, let's say, a new artist and there's a bidding war, like you try to get all those pieces in place really quickly. But we generally are following manager and attorney, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And attorney and manager, I think it can be, one or the other as first. A lot of the times we can be the first person on the team, but often management, is the first one on the team. But just agreeing with Tate that business management kind of comes into the picture once there's money to be managed,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how much money do you need to get with the business? Like when you're selling clubs, is that important, or do you think you can kind of manage your own books?
I hate to say it, but it really depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the complexity. If you've got international implications, that's a whole other ball of wax. If you're doing a lot of heavy touring, even if you're not making a lot of money, that's a lot of things to manage. So it really depends. It also depends on the artist's or the manager's capabilities to do it in the interim. You've got some artists who have that aptitude. I wouldn't say a whole lot of them, maybe.
Different brain.
But, if they can handle it for a certain amount of time, then that's great. It also allows them to understand it before we come in and take over, so they understand what's going on.
Totally.
So it just depends.
Okay, so rapid fire for you guys. First concert that you ever attended, Farrah?
No doubt, at the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Pavilion in Houston.
Yes.
Kenny Chesney. at I don't know, it was Hi-Fi Buys at that point. I believe it's changed names many times, but
Those are both great first ones. My goodness. And can I say your most memorable or favorite show you've ever been to, or favorite venue?
went to a show. It was outdoors in Atlanta, and we got to see Chris Stapleton open for Jason Isbell. And
What?
it was like a month before the CMAs when he played with Timberlake.
Whoa.
So right before kind of that inflection point. And I'd seen him before in the Steel Drivers, but
Yeah.
that was an amazing show. We were, sitting on the grass probably 40, 50 feet from the stage. So it was,
Opening
it was
for
cool.
Isbell. That's
Yeah.
so crazy.
Very cool.
Very jealous. Okay, how about you?
I will say a non-client related show, but just as a fan.
Yeah.
I saw Paramore at the Vans Warped Tour in 2013 in San Diego, and that was a fun show.
Yo, Warped Tour's coming back.
I heard. It's pretty cool.
Just came out with Kevin Lyman. It's cool, like what they're about to be. Yeah. So you gotta get on that. What is one thing that instantly breaks your trust? It's not quite rapid fire, but this is an interesting question.
Instantly breaks my trust. That's a good question. I think, when they bring new people in and start, there's certain questions, I guess, that get asked where you immediately know, okay, I see you didn't ask this question.
Yes.
Someone sent this to you to ask.
Got it.
And not to invalidate the question, right? But can we just cut through this? And where's this really coming from? Can we get to the heart of this issue? Because I'd rather just address it head on than have this kind of passive aggressive communication. So that would be the thing for me.
Yeah.
I think for me that trust is like the foundation of trust is communication. So I think that when we get into client relationships where we feel like they're not giving us all of the information we need in order to help advise them, those are the instances where I wouldn't say it's necessarily breaking the trust, but like it's hard to maintain trust in those kinds of client relationships because as an attorney and I'm sure as a business manager, it's like we can only give you really good advice if we know all of the facts. So if we feel like you're holding back something or maybe you're not being like genuine or like forthcoming with all of the information that we need in order to advise you, I think that always raises an eyebrow for me.
Yeah. And to end, what is truly the reason you love doing this job?
I love being around creative people.
Yeah.
I feel like creative people give me life. It's just like such a joy to be able to go and experience live music, especially when we get to see a little bit behind the scenes and get to, help the client in some way, make their dreams come true. I love being able to kind of use my skill set to help somebody else be creative and really put that art out into the world.
Love that.
Yeah, I think similar to that. I mean, I'm a problem solver at heart. That's why I did all this number stuff and got 2 majors in math and finance like a crazy person. And so marrying the numbers to the creative process is quite the problem to solve a lot of
Right.
times. And I think I have the most interesting, boring job out there in that a lot of people think, accounting's kind of boring and this and that. But when you marry it with that creative and you can see how, to your point, you can aid in those goals and that vision that the artist has, it is definitely pretty cool. And it never gets old, I think is what it is for me.
Never gets old.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. I learned a lot and I really appreciate your time. So great meeting y'all.
Yeah,
You
thank
too.
you for
Thank
having
you.
us.